They say marriage is about compromise. What they don't tell you is that sometimes one person does all the compromising while the other person does all the taking. I'm Dave Rourke, and I learned this lesson the hard way when I came home to find my entire comic collection gone. Let me back up. 3 months ago, I thought I had it all figured out. Nice house in suburban Oregon, decent job as a software engineer, a wife who tolerated my hobbies, and a 14-year-old son who actually liked hanging out with his old man. The American dream, right? Wrong. Dave, you're 39 years old, Melissa said that Tuesday evening, standing in our kitchen with a glass of wine that cost more than most people's lunch. Don't you think it's time to grow up? I was cataloging my latest acquisition, a pristine copy of X-Men number 94, first appearance of the new X-Men team. Not exactly rare, but in perfect condition and reasonably priced. I am grown up. I have a mortgage, a job, and I haven't eaten cereal for dinner in at least a week. She rolled her eyes. You know what I mean, all these comic books. They're just childish. Childish? I set down the comic carefully. This hobby has been with me longer than our marriage, and it's not hurting anyone. It's embarrassing. When Krista and Julia come over, they see all these boxes and think we're running some kind of weird museum. Krista and Julia, her work friends who treated our house like their personal wine bar and gossip central. I'd heard them whispering about me before, the boring husband who collected kid stuff instead of doing manly things like golf or home renovation. They can think whatever they want, I said. These comics are an investment. Some of them are worth serious money. Melissa laughed, but not in a good way. Serious money? Dave, they're picture books. Nobody's getting rich off picture books. That's where she was wrong. Very wrong. My collection wasn't just random comics grabbed from a spinner rack. I'd been collecting for 25 years, starting with my paper route money when I was 14. I knew what I was doing. I had first appearances, key issues, and several graded books that would make serious collectors weep with envy. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. The crown jewel was my Amazing Fantasy 15, Spider-Man's first appearance, graded 9.8 by CGC. I'd bought it 10 years ago for $30,000, and it was now worth close to $200,000. Then there was my Incredible Hulk 181, Wolverine's first appearance, also a 9.8. My X-Men 1 from 1963. My Fantastic Four 1. The whole collection was worth around $250,000. Not exactly pocket change, but I'd never told Melissa the real numbers. She knew I spent money on comics, but she thought it was maybe a few hundred here and there. If she knew the truth, she'd have pushed me to sell years ago. Dad, check this out, Ethan said, bouncing into the kitchen with his phone. Someone on Reddit found a mint-condition Superman number 1 in their grandpa's attic. It sold for $3 million. $3 million? Melissa's wine glass stopped halfway to her lips. That's an extreme case, I said quickly. That's literally the most valuable comic in existence. But some of your comics are worth a lot too, right? Ethan asked. He was genuinely interested in the hobby, unlike his mother. We'd spend hours going through price guides and discussing storylines. Some of them hold their value pretty well, I said, shooting him a look that meant not now. Melissa was staring at me with a strange expression. How much is pretty well? It varies. Market fluctuations, condition, demand. It's complicated? She nodded slowly, but I could practically see the wheels turning in her head. That should have been my first warning. The second warning came 2 weeks later when I caught her going through my collection while I was at work. I'd come home early with a migraine and found her in the basement, pulling comics out of their protective bags. What are you doing? I asked. She jumped like I'd caught her robbing a bank. Oh, I was just looking. Trying to understand what you see in these. You need to be careful with those. The oils from your skin can damage the paper. They're just comics, Dave. No, they're not. Some of these are 40, 50, 60 years old. They're pieces of history. She put the comic back in its bag, but not carefully. I winced as she bent the corner slightly. History? They're stories about men in tights. They're American mythology. They reflect the culture and values of their time. They're art. If you say so. That night, I moved my most valuable pieces to a safety deposit box. Call it paranoia, but something about her behavior felt off. The third warning was the conversation I overheard 3 weeks later. I'd gotten home from work and was about to announce myself when I heard voices in the living room. Melissa was having one of her wine sessions with Krista and Julia. I was about to walk in when I heard my name. Honestly, don't know how you stand it, Krista was saying. All those boxes of comics everywhere. It's like living with a teenager. Tell me about it, Melissa replied. Sometimes I feel like I'm married to a child. He gets more excited about finding some old comic than he does about, well, anything else. Have you tried talking to him about it? Julia asked. What's the point? He just goes on and on about investment potential and cultural significance. It's pathetic. My hand froze on the doorknob. Maybe he'll grow out of it, Krista suggested. He's 39, Krista. If he was going to grow out of it, don't you think he would have by now? They all laughed. It wasn't a kind laugh. At least he's not gambling or drinking, Julia offered. Sometimes I think that would be easier to deal with. At least those would be adult vices. I backed away from the door and went upstairs. Ethan was in his room doing homework. Hey, Dad, how was work? Fine, I said, but my voice came out flat. He looked up from his textbook. You okay? Yeah, just tired. But I wasn't okay. I was married to someone who thought my passion was pathetic. Someone who saw me as a child playing with toys instead of a man with interests and expertise. I should have confronted her right then, should have had the conversation that needed to happen. Instead, I did what I always did. I kept the peace. I compromised. 3 days later, I came home to find the basement empty. Not just empty. Cleaned out. 25 years of careful collecting, gone. The long boxes that had lined the walls were missing. The display cases were bare. Even my reading copies were gone. I stood there for a full minute, trying to process what I was seeing. This had to be a mistake. Maybe Melissa had moved everything for cleaning. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation. Melissa, I called upstairs. In the kitchen? I found her making dinner like nothing had happened. She was humming. Where are my comics? She didn't even look up from the stove. I sold them. The words hit me like a physical blow. You what? I sold them, on eBay. Got $8,000 for the whole lot. 8,000? My voice cracked. Melissa, some of those comics were worth more than 8,000 individually. She finally turned around, and she was smiling. Actually smiling. Oh, come on. They're just old comics. I did some research. Most of them were only worth a few dollars each. Research? What kind of research? I looked up some of the titles online. Most of them were selling for $10, $20. Some of the really old ones were going for maybe $100. I felt like I was going to throw up. Did you check the condition? The issue numbers? Did you look for key issues, first appearances, anything like that? Dave, they're comic books. How complicated can it be? I ran back downstairs, hoping against hope that maybe she just sold the cheap stuff, the reading copies, the duplicates. But no, everything was gone, including the comics I'd moved back from the safety deposit box just last week because I'd wanted to show a few to Ethan. The Amazing Fantasy Shaxford 15, I said when I got back to the kitchen. Please tell me you didn't sell the Amazing Fantasy Undarker 15. The Spider-Man one? Yeah, that was in there. Got $200 for it, which seemed pretty good for such an old comic. I had to sit down. $200. For a comic worth $200,000. Melissa, I said carefully, that comic was worth more than our car, she laughed. Don't be ridiculous. I'm not being ridiculous. It was professionally graded. It was in near mint condition. It was worth at least $200,000. The smile faded from her face. That's impossible. No, it's not. And that wasn't the only valuable one. The Hulk number 181 was worth $60,000. The X-Men number 1 was worth $40,000. You just sold $250,000 worth of comics for $8,000. She stared at me for a long moment. Then she shook her head. You're exaggerating. Trying to make me feel bad. Check for yourself. Look up Amazing Fantasy 15 CGC 9.8 and see what they're selling for. She pulled out her phone. I watched her face as she typed and scrolled. The color drained from her cheeks. This can't be right. It says they're selling for $200,000, sometimes more. She sat down hard in the chair across from me. I didn't know. You didn't ask. You didn't research. You just decided my hobby was worthless and got rid of it. But I thought I was helping. I thought I was finally getting you to grow up. By stealing my property and selling it without permission? I didn't steal anything. We're married. It's community property. Not in Oregon. Personal property acquired before marriage remains separate unless it's commingled. Those comics were mine. I'd looked this up years ago when we'd had our first big fight about my collecting. I'd wanted to know where I stood legally. You're going to call the buyers, I continued. You're going to explain the mistake and offer to buy everything back at current market value. With what money? We don't have $200,000 lying around. Then you're going to figure something out. Because if you don't, I'm calling my lawyer. She stared at me like she'd never seen me before. You wouldn't. Try me. That night, Melissa slept in the guest room. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out how my marriage had gotten to this point. When had my wife stopped seeing me as a partner and started seeing me as a problem to be solved? The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to Greg's comic shop. Greg had been my best friend since high school and the one person who truly understood what I'd lost. She did what? Greg's voice went up an octave. Sold the whole collection. Everything. Even the graded books. Greg sat down heavily behind his counter. Dave, I am so sorry. That's just unthinkable. I need you to help me track down the buyers. Maybe some of them will be reasonable. Of course, whatever you need. We spent the morning going through eBay's sold listings, trying to identify my comics. It was worse than I'd thought. Melissa had listed everything with generic descriptions and terrible photos. A comic worth $5,000 had sold for $50 because she'd listed it as an old X-Men comic somewhere. This is criminal, Greg muttered, scrolling through the listings. She basically gave this stuff away. The question is, what do I do about it? Greg looked at me seriously. Dave, you know I love you like a brother, right? Yeah. Then you know I'm saying this with love. You need to make her pay for this, not just financially. She needs to understand what she did. What do you mean? I mean she humiliated you. She dismissed something you care about and threw it away like garbage. If you just let this slide, she'll do it again. Maybe not with comics, but with something else. He was right. This wasn't really about the comics, as much as they meant to me. This was about respect, about being seen as an equal partner instead of a child who needed to be managed. So what do you suggest? Greg smiled, but it wasn't a nice smile. I suggest you show her exactly how much she messed up, and I suggest you do it in a way she'll never forget. I'm listening. First, we contact every single buyer. We let them know what they really bought. Some of them will probably be decent about it, but others... Greg shrugged. Others are going to be very unhappy with your wife when they realize she scammed them. She didn't mean to scam them. Intent doesn't matter, results do, and the result is that she sold valuable merchandise for a fraction of its worth. That's fraud, even if it's accidental. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. What are you saying? I'm saying your wife is about to become very unpopular with a lot of people who now think she tried to cheat them, and I'm saying that's exactly what she deserves. Greg was right. Melissa had made her choice when she decided to sell my collection without asking. Now she was going to live with the consequences. Okay, I said, let's do this. The first thing I did was call my lawyer. Jennifer Zhao had handled our house purchase 3 years ago and had impressed me with her thoroughness and complete lack of patience for nonsense. She was also, as I'd learned during our closing, a comic collector herself. Dave, good to hear from you. Please tell me you're not refinancing again. No, nothing like that. I need to sue my wife. There was a pause. I'm sorry. What? My wife sold my comic collection without permission. $250,000 worth of comics. She sold them for $8,000. Jesus Christ, are you serious? Completely serious. Okay, come in this afternoon. Bring documentation of the collection's value and any evidence you have of the sale. I spent the morning gathering evidence. Photos of my collection from insurance documentation, price guides, recent sales data for comparable comics, screenshots of Melissa's eBay listings. By the time I walked into Jennifer's office, I had a folder 3 inches thick. Jennifer flipped through the documentation, her expression growing darker with each page. Wow, this is really bad, Dave. How bad? Well, the good news is you have a clear case. These were your separate property acquired before marriage. She had no right to sell them without your consent. And the bad news? The bad news is that most of the buyers probably have no legal obligation to return the comics. They bought them in good faith from someone who appeared to have the right to sell them. My heart sank. So I'm screwed? Not necessarily. We can pursue Melissa for the full value of what was lost. She's liable for the difference between what she sold them for and what they were actually worth. She doesn't have that kind of money. Then she'll have to figure out how to get it. We can put liens on property, garnish wages, whatever it takes. Jennifer leaned back in her chair. But Dave, before we go down this road, I have to ask, are you sure this is what you want? This is going to get ugly, really ugly, and it's going to be very public. What do you mean? I mean, we're going to have to prove the value of what was lost. That means expert witnesses, appraisals, documentation. It's going to be in court records. Probably in the local paper. Everyone's going to know that your wife cost you $250,000. I thought about that for a moment. Melissa was obsessed with her image, with what people thought of her. She'd be mortified. Good, I said. Jennifer smiled. Okay then, let's destroy her. While Jennifer prepared the legal paperwork, Greg and I started contacting the buyers. We'd identified about 60 different purchasers from Melissa's eBay listings. Some had bought single issues, others had bought entire lots. The first few calls went better than expected. A collector in Portland had bought my Fantastic Four Nera 48, first appearance of Silver Surfer, for $40. When I explained what it was actually worth, he immediately offered to return it. Man, I feel terrible about this, he said. I knew something was weird when I saw the listing. A 9.6 graded first appearance of Silver Surfer for $40. I figured it was a mistake, but I thought maybe she just needed the money quick. Would you be willing to write a statement about the transaction? I asked. Absolutely. Your wife really screwed you over. But not everyone was so accommodating. The second call went very differently. Yeah, I bought some comics from your wife. So what? So I'm calling to let you know that what you bought was significantly undervalued. That amazing Spider-Man Naren 29 you got for $30, it's actually worth about $3,000. Sounds like your wife's problem, not mine. Actually, it's going to be your problem, too. We're filing a lawsuit over the fraudulent sale of the collection. Every buyer is going to be named as a potential witness. Fraudulent? Hey, I bought that comic fair and square. From someone who didn't have the right to sell it and who misrepresented its value. There was a long pause. Are you threatening me? I'm informing you. What you do with that information is up to you. He hung up on me, but 20 minutes later he called back. Look, I don't want any legal trouble. What do you want? I want the comic back. I'll pay you what you paid for it, plus your shipping costs. Fine. But this is really messed up, you know that? Your wife made me look like some kind of criminal. Yeah, I said. She's good at that. By the end of the first day, we'd recovered about 15 comics and identified another 20 buyers who were willing to cooperate. But we'd also found several who were planning to flip their purchases immediately, now that they knew what they were really worth. That's when Greg had his brilliant idea. You know what we should do? He said, leaning back in his chair at the comic shop. We should make this public. Really public. What do you mean? I mean, we should tell this story everywhere. Comic collecting forums, social media, local news. Make it a cautionary tale. I don't know, Greg. That seems kind of vindictive. Vindictive? Dave, your wife cost you $250,000 because she thought your hobby was stupid. She humiliated you. She dismissed 25 years of your passion as worthless junk? And you think going public is vindictive? He had a point. Besides, Greg continued, it serves a purpose. The more people who know about this, the more pressure there'll be on the buyers to do the right thing, and the more embarrassed Melissa will be, the more motivated she'll be to fix this. You really think embarrassment will motivate her? Dave, I've known Melissa for 10 years. What does she care about most? I thought about it. Oh, what people think of her. Exactly. So let's give people something to think about. That night, Greg posted the story on Reddit's comic collecting forum. He laid out the whole situation in detail. The secret sale, the massive undervaluation, the legal action we were taking. He included photos of some of the eBay listings with Melissa's username clearly visible. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Holy crap, this is insane, one commenter wrote. A 9.8 amazing fantasy Nera 15 for $200? This woman needs to be sued into the ground. I would divorce my spouse so fast it would break the sound barrier, said another. This is exactly why I keep my collection in a storage unit my wife doesn't know about, added a third. But the most interesting responses came from people who recognized Melissa's eBay username. Wait, I bought something from this seller, one person posted. She sold me what she listed as old Superman comic, fair condition, for $12. I just looked it up based on the issue number, and it's actually Superman Nera 233, worth about $800 in the condition it's in. I got a vintage X-Men comic from her for $25. Posted another. It's X-Men number 94, first appearance of the new X-Men, worth at least $400. Within hours, dozens of buyers were coming forward, realizing they'd bought significantly undervalued comics. Some were offering to return them or pay the difference. Others were bragging about their incredible finds. But the most satisfying response came from someone who'd apparently tried to lowball Melissa on a lot of comics and been turned down. I actually messaged this seller about buying some of her higher-priced items for less money, they wrote. She told me the prices were firm and that she'd done her research. Guess her research wasn't very good. The Reddit post got picked up by other forums, comic collecting Facebook groups, Twitter. Within 24 hours, Drakshar Comicgate was trending locally, and Melissa's eBay username was infamous in collecting circles. That's when she called me. Dave, what the hell did you do? I told the truth. People are calling me a fraud. They're saying I'm a scammer. Are they wrong? I didn't mean to underprice anything. I made a mistake. A $250,000 mistake that you made because you thought my hobby was worthless. That's not... I never said it was worthless. You called it childish. You called it embarrassing. You told your friends it was pathetic. There was silence on the other end of the line. You heard that? I heard that. More silence. Dave, we need to fix this. People are harassing me online. My boss asked me about it. This is affecting my job. Good. Good? Dave, I'm your wife. Are you? Because wives don't usually steal their husband's property and sell it behind their back. I was trying to help you grow up. By making decisions for me like I'm a child. By dismissing something I care about. By humiliating me. I never meant to humiliate you. Well, you did. And now you know how it feels. I hung up on her. The next morning, Jennifer called with an update on the legal front. I've got good news and bad news, she said. The good news is that we've got an airtight case. I've had 3 expert appraisers look at your documentation, and they all agree on the value. We can prove exactly how much she cost you. And the bad news? The bad news is that Melissa hired a lawyer, a good one. This is going to be a fight. What's her defense going to be? Probably that she acted in good faith, that she didn't know the true value, and that as your spouse, she had some right to dispose of marital property. But you said the comics were separate property. They were, but she's going to argue that they became marital property when you moved them into the marital home and used marital funds to maintain and insure them. I felt a chill. Is that a valid argument? It's not completely without merit, but I think we can beat it. The key is proving that you always treated the collection as separate property and that she knew it was separate property. How do we do that? Testimony, documentation, evidence that she understood these were your personal belongings, not joint assets. What about the insurance? I had them listed on our homeowner's policy. That actually helps us. The insurance documentation shows that you were the one managing the collection, that you were the one who knew its value, and that you took steps to protect it. It demonstrates that this was your separate property that you were responsible for. So what's next? Next, we file a formal complaint and serve her with papers. And then things get really interesting. That afternoon, a process server showed up at Melissa's office to deliver the lawsuit. According to Greg, who'd heard it from his girlfriend who worked in the same building, Melissa had to be escorted to the bathroom because she started crying in the middle of a meeting. I should have felt bad about that, but I didn't. That evening, Ethan came to find me in my home office. Dad, Mom's really upset. I know. She says you're suing her. I am. He sat down in the chair across from my desk. Because of the comics? Because she stole from me. Because she made a major decision about my property without asking me. Because she didn't respect me enough to talk to me before she acted. Ethan nodded slowly. I heard her on the phone with Aunt Krista. She said the comics weren't really worth what you said they were worth. What do you think? I think Mom doesn't know anything about comics, and I think she didn't want to know. Smart kid. Are you and Mom going to get divorced? He asked. It was the question I'd been dreading. I don't know, buddy. Maybe. Would I have to choose who to live with? Probably not. But if you did, you could choose whoever you wanted. He was quiet for a moment. I'd choose you. Why? Because you never lied to me about what things were worth, and because you never threw away my stuff without asking. That night, Melissa tried one more time to get me to drop the lawsuit. Dave, please, can't we work this out between ourselves? How? I'll get the money somehow. I'll take out a loan or... With what collateral? You don't have anything worth $250,000. The house is jointly owned. You can't borrow against it without my signature. She was quiet for a long time. What do you want from me? I want you to understand what you did. I want you to face the consequences. And I want everyone to know exactly what kind of person you are. What kind of person am I? The kind who thinks she knows better than everyone else. The kind who makes decisions for other people without asking. The kind who destroys things she doesn't understand. That's not fair. Neither was selling my comics. The next morning, the local newspaper picked up the story. The headline read, Local woman accidentally sells $250,000 comic collection for $8,000. The article included quotes from comic experts about the value of what had been lost and mentioned the pending lawsuit. Melissa called in sick to work, But I was just getting started. The newspaper article changed everything. What had started as a personal dispute between a husband and wife suddenly became a local sensation. By noon, 3 different radio stations had called asking for interviews. The story was shared hundreds of times on social media, and Melissa's life began to unravel in ways I hadn't even planned. The first crack appeared at her job. Melissa worked as an HR executive for a mid-sized marketing firm, a position that required discretion, good judgment, and attention to detail. Having your name in the newspaper for making a $250,000 mistake didn't exactly scream promotion material. "Dave, you have to make this stop," she pleaded over the phone. "My boss wants to see me first thing Monday morning. People are laughing at me." Good. Good? Dave, I could lose my job over this. Maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to play eBay entrepreneur with my property. I was trying to help our family. I thought we could use that money for something practical, like home improvements or Ethan's college fund. By stealing from me? It wasn't stealing. We're married. Not for much longer if you keep this up. The silence on the other end told me she was finally starting to understand how serious this had become. But the real fireworks started when the comic collecting community began to mobilize. Greg had been busy on the forums, and collectors from across the country were now following the story. Some of them decided to take direct action. It started with phone calls. Melissa's eBay account was flooded with messages from collectors who'd seen the story and wanted to express their opinions about what she'd done. Most of these messages were not polite. Then came the reviews. Dozens of comic collectors left negative feedback on her eBay account, warning other potential buyers about her fraudulent listings. Her seller rating, which had been perfect before this mess, plummeted overnight. But the most creative revenge came from a collector in California who'd bought one of my lower-value comics, a copy of Amazing Spider-Man 200 that he'd gotten for $5. The comic was actually worth about $50, not a huge loss in the grand scheme of things. Instead of keeping quiet about his bargain, this collector, who went by Webhead87 online, decided to auction the comic himself. But instead of a normal auction, he created a listing titled Amazing Spider-Man Lucker 200, stolen from Oregon collector by his wife. The listing description told the whole story of how he'd acquired the comic, included links to the news articles about the case, and stated that all proceeds from the sale would be donated to a comic book literacy program in my name. The auction went viral. Comic collectors, outraged by Melissa's actions, began bidding up the $50 comic out of pure spite. The final selling price was $800, 16 times the comic's actual value. Webhead87 kept his promise and donated every penny to charity, but not before sending Melissa a message letting her know what he'd done. "Your husband's comic just raised $800 for charity," he wrote. "Too bad you only got $5 for it when you stole it from him." Other buyers began following Webhead87's example. A collector in Texas auctioned off the copy of X-Men number 101 he'd bought from Melissa for $15. It sold for $200, with the proceeds going to a comic museum. A woman in Florida sold her copy of Avengers L'Artillerie 55 and used the money to buy comics for her local library. Each auction included the story of how the comic had been liberated from Melissa's fraudulent sale. Each one generated more publicity. Each one made Melissa look worse. Meanwhile, I was working with Jennifer to build our legal case. We'd managed to track down most of the buyers and had statements from about half of them. The pattern was clear. Melissa had consistently undervalued the comics because she'd done no real research into their worth. "The thing that's going to hurt her most in court," Jennifer explained, "is that she clearly didn't care about getting fair value. She just wanted to get rid of them quickly." "What do you mean?" "Look at the timing of the sales. She listed everything over a 3-day period, all as 7-day auctions ending on the same day. She didn't research comparable sales, didn't check price guides, didn't even read the comics to see if they were key issues. She just wanted them gone." "That proves what, exactly?" "That this wasn't about money or helping the family finances. This was about punishing you for having a hobby she didn't approve of." Jennifer was right. If Melissa had really been trying to maximize the value of the collection, she would have taken time to research what she was selling. She would have asked me for help, or at least told me what she was planning. Instead, she'd acted in secret and in haste, which suggested her real motivation was spite. But Melissa wasn't going down without a fight. Her lawyer, a sharp-dressed guy named Richard Stone, filed a countersuit alleging that I was harassing his client and damaging her reputation. "Harassment?" I said when Jennifer told me about the countersuit. "She's the one who stole from me." "I know, but Stone's arguing that your social media campaign and the publicity you've generated constitute harassment and intentional infliction of emotional distress." "Can he make that stick?" "Probably not. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation claims, and everything we've said about what she did is true. As for harassment, you have a First Amendment right to tell your story. So what's his real strategy? He's trying to make you look like the bad guy, paint you as a vindictive husband who's using the legal system to punish his wife for making an honest mistake. Honest mistake? That's going to be their defense. She made an honest mistake about the value of the comics, and now you're destroying her life over it. What about all the evidence that she knew I valued the collection? What about the fact that she did this behind my back? We'll present all of that, but Stone's going to argue that she thought she was doing you a favor by getting rid of what she saw as clutter. By selling it without telling me? He'll say she wanted to surprise you with the money. I laughed bitterly. Some surprise. The countersuit backfired spectacularly. Instead of making me look vindictive, it made Melissa look desperate and dishonest. The comic collecting community, which had already rallied around my cause, became even more incensed. Now she's trying to sue him for exposing what she did, one forum poster wrote. This woman has no shame. First, she steals his collection. Now she wants to silence him for talking about it, added another. What's next? Claiming the comics attacked her first? The story got picked up by larger publications. A comic industry website ran a feature article about the case, interviewing several experts about the legal and ethical issues involved. A YouTube channel with 500,000 subscribers made a video about the situation that got over 100,000 views. And through it all, more details kept emerging that made Melissa look worse. A neighbor, Mrs. Patel, came forward with information that proved Melissa had been planning this for weeks. She'd seen Melissa loading boxes into her car multiple times and had asked about it. She told me she was finally getting rid of Dave's junk, Mrs. Patel told Jennifer during a deposition. She seemed very happy about it. She said Dave would thank her once he saw how much money she got. Another damaging revelation came from Melissa's friend Krista, who apparently had a conscience after all. She contacted me through Facebook to apologize for the things they'd said about my collecting. I feel terrible about this whole situation, she wrote. I want you to know that Melissa asked me and Julia for advice about selling your comics, and we both told her she should talk to you first. She said she wanted to surprise you, but honestly, it seemed more like she just wanted them gone. Would you be willing to testify about that conversation? I asked. If it would help, yes. What she did was wrong. Even Julia, who had been the most vocal critic of my hobby during those wine sessions, reached out to express her regret. I never thought she'd actually do something like this, Julia wrote. We were just venting, you know? Everyone complains about their spouse's hobbies sometimes, but selling them without permission? That's crazy. The defection of her closest friends hit Melissa hard. These were the women she'd been trying to impress, the ones whose approval she'd sought by getting rid of my embarrassing collection. Now they were lining up to testify against her. But the most devastating blow came from an unexpected source. Ethan. My son had been remarkably mature about the whole situation, but he was also 14 and not immune to the social pressures of having his family drama splashed across the internet. Kids at school had seen the news stories and were asking him about it. Dad, he said one evening, I need to tell you something. What's up? Mom asked me to lie for her. I felt my stomach drop. What do you mean? She wanted me to tell the lawyer that you never really cared about the comics that much, that you were always talking about selling them anyway. And what did you tell her? I told her I wouldn't lie, and I told her that wasn't true anyway. You love those comics. You've been collecting them since before I was born. What did she say to that? She started crying and said I was choosing sides. I pulled Ethan into a hug. You're not choosing sides, buddy. You're just telling the truth. I know, but it still feels bad. I'm sorry you're in the middle of this. It's not your fault, Dad. Mom's the one who started it. Out of the mouths of babes. That weekend, things escalated even further. Someone had created a Facebook page called Justice for Dave's Comics that had attracted over 10,000 followers. The page shared updates about the case, posted photos of the comics that had been sold, and encouraged people to contact local news outlets to keep the story in the public eye. Melissa was now getting recognized in public. Someone at the grocery store had approached her and asked if she was the comic book lady. She'd been so flustered that she'd abandoned her cart and left the store. This has gone too far, she said when she called me that Sunday night. I can't go anywhere without people staring at me. Welcome to consequences. Dave, please, I'll do whatever you want. I'll pay you back somehow. Just make it stop. It's too late for that. You made this public when you decided to sell my property on eBay. Now everyone gets to see what kind of person you really are. I'm not a bad person. I made a mistake. You made a choice. You chose to disrespect me, dismiss my interests, and steal my property. Now you get to live with the results of that choice. What about Ethan? This is affecting him too? You should have thought about that before you decided to blow up our family over your petty resentments. She was crying now. I never meant for it to go this far. What did you think would happen? That I'd just accept losing $250,000 and thank you for it? I thought you'd realize I was right, that you'd see this as a chance to move on from childish things. Childish things? Melissa, I'm about to own half your retirement account because of your childish decision to steal from me. That got her attention. What do you mean? I mean, when we get divorced, and we are getting divorced, I'm going to be entitled to half of everything you own. Your 401k, your savings, your car, everything. And since you cost me $250,000, I'm going to make sure I get every penny I'm entitled to. The line went quiet. You can't be serious about divorce. Why not? You clearly don't respect me. You think my interests are stupid. You make major decisions without consulting me. You steal from me. Exactly what part of that sounds like a healthy marriage to you? But we can work through this. No, we can't. Because even now, after everything that's happened, you still think you were justified. You still think I'm the problem. That's not true, isn't it? Have you apologized even once for what you did? Have you taken responsibility for the damage you caused? Or have you just complained about the consequences? She couldn't answer that, because we both knew the truth. Melissa was sorry she'd been caught, sorry she was facing consequences, but she wasn't sorry for what she'd done. I want you out of the house by Friday, I said. You can't kick me out of my own home. Watch me. I've already talked to Jennifer about it. Since you've demonstrated that you can't be trusted with my property, I'm going to ask for a restraining order to keep you away from anything else you might decide to help me with. Dave, please. You made your choice, Melissa. Now live with it. I hung up and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. For the first time since this whole mess started, I wasn't angry, I wasn't hurt, I wasn't confused about what to do next. I was done. Melissa didn't leave by Friday. Instead, she hired a different lawyer, a family law specialist who immediately filed for an emergency injunction to prevent me from forcing her out of the house. She also filed for divorce first, probably hoping to control the narrative. It didn't work. She's trying to paint herself as the victim, Jennifer explained during our meeting the following Monday. Her new lawyer is claiming that you've orchestrated a harassment campaign against her and that she's afraid for her safety. Afraid for her safety? I've never threatened her. I know, but they're pointing to all the online attention, the negative comments, the fact that strangers are recognizing her in public. They're saying it constitutes a pattern of intimidation. That's ridiculous. Of course it is. But it's a smart legal strategy. If they can convince a judge that you're the aggressor, they might be able to get a more favorable settlement. What do we do about it? We fight fire with fire. I'm filing a motion to have her removed from the house based on her theft of your property, and I'm requesting that the court order her to account for every single comic she sold and make restitution at current market value. Can they do that? Absolutely. Theft is theft, even between spouses, and the evidence is overwhelming. Jennifer was right about the evidence. We now had statements from over 40 buyers, expert appraisals of the collection's value, and documentation of every single sale Melissa had made. We could prove exactly what had been taken and exactly how much it was worth. But Melissa's new strategy was causing problems in other ways. Her claim that she was being harassed had gotten picked up by a few sympathetic bloggers who were trying to reframe the story as an example of online bullying. Wife makes innocent mistake. Husband destroys her life. Read one headline. The dark side of comic book culture. When fandom becomes harassment. Read another. These articles painted me as an obsessive collector who cared more about comics than about my family, and Melissa as a well-meaning wife who'd made an understandable error in judgment. The comic collecting community was not amused. Innocent mistake, Greg raged, showing me the articles on his phone. She sold $250,000 worth of comics for $8,000, and they're calling it an innocent mistake? Let it go, Greg. The truth is going to come out in court. No way. This is character assassination. They're trying to make you look like the bad guy when she's the one who committed theft. What are you going to do about it? Greg smiled. I'm going to tell the real story. The whole story, including the parts that make her look even worse. What parts? The parts about why she really sold your comics. The parts about what she was planning to do with the money. The parts about her boyfriend. I stared at him. What boyfriend? You didn't know? Dave, she's been having an affair. For months. The world seemed to tilt sideways. How do you know that? Because I've seen them together, at that new gym downtown. They weren't exactly being subtle about it. Who is he? A guy named Trent Sanders. He owns the gym. Real smooth-talking type. Drives a red Mustang, wears too much cologne. You know the type. I sat down heavily. An affair. Of course, there was an affair. How long have you known? I suspected for a few weeks, but I wasn't sure until yesterday. I went to the gym to check it out, and I saw them together. They were very friendly. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because you had enough to deal with, and because I wanted to be sure before I said anything. Are you sure now? Positive. I've got photos. Greg showed me his phone. There was Melissa, in workout clothes I'd never seen before, laughing at something a muscular guy with perfect hair was saying. In another photo, they were standing very close together, his hand on her lower back. Son of a... I stopped myself. This explains everything. What do you mean? The sudden interest in getting rid of my comics. The need for quick cash. She was planning to leave me anyway. Greg nodded. That's what I figured. She probably told this Trent guy about your collection, and he convinced her to sell it so they'd have money to start their new life together. $8,000 isn't exactly start a new life money. No, but it's pay for a nice vacation while we figure out our next move money. I felt sick. Not because of the affair. Honestly, that almost came as a relief. It explained so much about Melissa's behavior over the past few months. The distance, the criticism, the sudden need to help me grow up. No, I felt sick because of what this meant for Ethan. Does my son know? I don't think so, but Dave, this actually helps your case. A lot. How? Because it proves that the comic sale wasn't an innocent mistake or an attempt to help the family. It was part of a plan to leave you. She was liquidating assets before filing for divorce. Greg was right. This changed everything. I called Jennifer immediately. Are you absolutely certain about this? She asked after I'd explained what Greg had discovered. Greg has photos, and it makes sense. The timing, the secrecy, the rush to sell everything quickly. This is huge, Dave. If we can prove that she sold your comics as part of a plan to leave you, it becomes a much more serious form of theft. She was essentially stealing marital assets to fund her affair. What does that mean for the case? It means we can probably get punitive damages on top of the actual value of what was stolen, and it means her divorce filing is going to backfire spectacularly. How so? Because adultery affects property division in Oregon. If she was planning to leave you anyway, and she stole your property to help finance that plan, the court is going to take a very dim view of her claims for spousal support or property division. I felt a grim satisfaction. Melissa had thought she was so clever, getting ahead of the story by filing for divorce first, but she'd just handed us the perfect weapon to use against her. What's our next move? We hire a private investigator to document the affair. We get proof of how long it's been going on and whether any marital assets were used to support it, and then we destroy her in court. Jennifer, I need to ask you something. Are we going too far with this? Dave, she stole $250,000 from you to help fund her affair. She's trying to paint you as an abusive husband to avoid consequences for her theft. She's attempting to turn your son against you. How exactly would we be going too far? I don't want to become the kind of person who destroys someone's life over money. This isn't about money, Dave. This is about justice. This is about making sure that people can't just steal from their spouses and walk away without consequences. She was right. This had stopped being about the comics a long time ago. This was about respect, about trust, about the basic rules that make society function. Okay, I said. Let's do this. The private investigator Jennifer recommended was a former police detective named Maria Santos. She was thorough, professional, and completely unsympathetic to cheating spouses. I see this kind of thing all the time, she told me during our first meeting. Spouse starts an affair, begins liquidating assets, then files for divorce claiming they're the victim. It's a classic pattern. How long will it take to get proof? If they're as careless as your friend suggests, probably not long. Most cheaters get sloppy once they think they're in the clear. Maria was right. Within a week, she had documented multiple meetings between Melissa and Trent, including several at hotels during times when Melissa was supposed to be at work. She also discovered that Melissa had been using our joint credit card to pay for dinners, drinks, and even a weekend trip to the coast. She's been funding this affair with marital assets for at least 3 months, Maria reported. Probably longer. How much money are we talking about? At least $5,000 that I can document, probably more. Can we prove that the comic sale was connected to the affair? I'm working on that, but I did find something interesting. Your wife made a large cash deposit into her personal checking account 3 days after the last comic auction ended. $8,000. The money from the sales. Right, but here's the thing. She withdrew $4,000 of it in cash the next day. I'm trying to figure out where that money went. 2 days later, Maria had her answer. Your wife gave Trent Sanders $4,000, she told me over the phone. I have photos of her handing him an envelope at his gym and bank records showing the withdrawal. What did he need $4,000 for? According to the records I was able to access, his gym is in financial trouble. He's behind on rent, equipment payments, insurance. That $4,000 probably kept him from getting evicted. So there it was. Melissa hadn't just sold my comics on a whim or to help me grow up. She'd sold them to get cash to help her boyfriend save his failing business. Maria, you're a genius. I'm just thorough. But Dave, there's something else you need to know. What? They're planning to leave town together. I overheard a conversation between them yesterday. They're talking about moving to California, starting fresh somewhere else. When? Soon. Within the next few weeks, from what I could gather. What about the divorce proceedings? I think they're planning to run before those get resolved. Take whatever cash they can grab and disappear. I felt a cold rage settle over me. Not only had Melissa stolen from me and cheated on me, but now she was planning to flee the state to avoid facing the consequences. We need to stop them. I'm already on it. I've documented their plans and I'm tracking their movements. If they try to run, we'll know about it immediately. What can we do legally? Your lawyer can ask the court to freeze her assets and prevent her from leaving the state. Given the evidence of theft and the flight risk, most judges would grant that request. I called Jennifer immediately. This is perfect, she said when I explained what Maria had discovered. We file an emergency motion tomorrow morning. Asset freeze, travel restriction, the whole 9 yards. Will it work? With this evidence? Absolutely. She stole your property, used the proceeds to fund an affair, and now she's planning to flee the jurisdiction. Any judge is going to see that as a clear attempt to avoid responsibility. What about Trent? Can we go after him too? If he knowingly received stolen property, yes. And if he helped plan the theft or encouraged it, he could be charged as an accessory. Charged? Like criminally? Dave, your wife didn't just commit a civil wrong. She committed a felony. Theft of property worth more than $1,000 is a felony in Oregon. And we're talking about property worth $250,000. You think the district attorney would prosecute? With this much evidence and this much publicity, I'd be shocked if they didn't. The next morning, Jennifer filed our emergency motion. By noon, we had a court date for the following day. By evening, Melissa had been served with papers freezing her assets and prohibiting her from leaving the state. She called me that night, hysterical. Dave, what have you done? I can't access my bank accounts. I can't leave town. This is insane. What's insane is that you thought you could steal from me, cheat on me, and then run away to California with your boyfriend. Silence. You know about Trent. I know everything, Melissa. The affair, the money you gave him, the plans to leave town. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. You've been planning to leave me for months. You sold my comics to get quick cash for your boyfriend's failing business. And when that wasn't enough, you decided to cut and run before facing the consequences. I never meant for it to happen this way. You never meant to get caught. Dave, please, we can still work this out. I'll call off the divorce. I'll pay you back somehow. Just don't let this go to court. It's too late for that. What about Ethan? Do you want him to see his mother destroyed in court? I want him to see that actions have consequences. I want him to learn that you can't just take what doesn't belong to you and expect to get away with it. You're going to ruin my life over some stupid comics. And there it was. Even now, even after everything that had happened, she still thought my collection was stupid. She still didn't understand what she'd done. No, Melissa. You ruined your own life when you decided to steal from me. I'm just making sure everyone knows about it. The court hearing the next day was everything I'd hoped for and more. Jennifer presented our evidence methodically. The theft of the comics, the affair, the misuse of marital assets, the plan to flee the state. Maria testified about what she'd observed and documented. Even Greg took the stand to describe what he'd witnessed at the gym. Melissa's lawyer tried to argue that she'd acted in good faith, that the affair was irrelevant to the property dispute, and that the travel restrictions were excessive. But he was clearly outgunned. The judge, a stern woman in her 50s, was not impressed with Melissa's excuses. Mrs. Rourke, she said, you sold property worth approximately $250,000 for $8,000 without your husband's knowledge or consent. You then used a portion of those proceeds to financially support a man with whom you were having an extramarital affair. And when faced with legal consequences for these actions, you plan to leave the state. Is that an accurate summary? Melissa's lawyer whispered something to her, and she nodded reluctantly. Yes, Your Honor, but I can explain. I don't think any explanation is necessary. The asset freeze remains in place, the travel restriction remains in place, and I'm ordering you to provide a full accounting of every penny you received from the sale of your husband's property." "Your Honor," Melissa's lawyer interjected, "my client is willing to make restitution." "At current market value," the judge said firmly, "not at the prices she received for the stolen property." "Your Honor, that could be hundreds of thousands of dollars." "Then your client should have thought about that before she decided to steal hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of property." The judge turned to Jennifer. "Counselor, I assume you'll be referring this matter to the district attorney's office?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Good. This court takes theft very seriously, regardless of the relationship between the parties." As we left the courthouse, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: vindication. "How do you feel?" Jennifer asked. "Like justice actually exists." "This is just the beginning, Dave. We still have the divorce proceedings, the criminal case, and the civil lawsuit. But today was a good start." That evening, Ethan asked me how the hearing had gone. "The judge agreed that what your mother did was wrong," I told him. "Is she going to jail?" "I don't know. Maybe." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry this happened to you, Dad." "I'm sorry it happened to all of us, buddy." "Are you happy that Mom's in trouble?" I thought about that. I'm happy that she's finally facing consequences for what she did. I'm happy that the truth came out. But I'm not happy that our family fell apart. "It's not your fault." "No, it's not. But that doesn't make it hurt less." "Dad?" "Yeah?" "I'm proud of you for fighting back." "Why?" "Because you didn't just let her get away with it. You stood up for yourself." That night, as I sat in my empty house, I realized Ethan was right. For the first time in my marriage, I'd refused to be the one who compromised. I'd refused to accept being treated with disrespect. I'd fought back, and I'd won. The story wasn't over yet. There would be more court dates, more lawyers, more public humiliation for Melissa. The criminal case would probably take months to resolve. The divorce would be messy and expensive. But the most important battle was already finished. I'd proven that I wouldn't be a victim. I'd shown that actions have consequences. And I'd demonstrated that sometimes the good guys actually do win. My comic collection was gone, probably forever, but I'd gained something more valuable, my self-respect, and that was worth more than all the comics in the world.